Are available now at afastore.net.
I welcome everyone to this confirmation hearing on the nomination of
Mr. Chairman.
Brett Kavanaugh.
Mr. Chairman.
There were people that had come along and had a bag of money, and the people would hand them a piece of paper, and then they would give them money. So we knew that money was being exchanged for some of the people to be here just to protest.
I thought it was an embarrassment for the Democrat Party, but frankly, not surprising at all.
His job is to be fair and dispassionate. It is not to exercise empathy. It is to follow written laws.
What we saw yesterday was really an embarrassment.
Judge Kavanaugh doesn't hate women and children. Judge Kavanaugh doesn't lust after dirty water and stinky air.
Over procedural matters. But today is different.
Freedom prospers when religion is vibrant and the rule of law under God is acknowledged.
An informed patriot is what we want.
Welcome to American Family Radio's Focal Point, the home of muscular Christianity on conservative talk radio.
Muscular Christianity.
Where we relentlessly explore the intersection of truth and politics.
The trouble with our liberal friends is not that they're ignorant. It's just that they know so much that isn't so.
Now, here's your host, Brian Fisher.
And good afternoon, America. Fred Jackson sitting in for vacationing Brian Fisher today. So good to be with you. We thank you, Jeff, our producer, for putting that montage together. Jeff, listening to that montage and what we're talking about, the hearings have opened. The Senate Judiciary Committee has opened hearings on the President Trump's latest nominee for the Supreme Court, Judge Brett Kavanaugh. When I listened to that montage, I was wondering, are we now living in a banana republic created by the Democratic Party? Because it was a circus yesterday, and unfortunately, to a certain extent, it has continued today with Democrats disrupting this hearing. The President of the United States has a constitutional right to nominate people to the court system, and in this case, to the United States Supreme Court. The Democrats, since the very day, 8-9 weeks ago, when President Trump nominated Judge Brett Kavanaugh to be the next Supreme Court justice, the Democrats have had it in their minds they're going to do everything they can to stop this. And to a certain extent, you know, it is the opposing party, that's what they do. But I've never seen this extent of opposition. Now, I want to play you a little bit, and this will be cut number one, a little bit of the opening yesterday. Now, Senator Chuck Grassley is the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee. And as is tradition, whether it's Republicans are in power, the Democrats in power, there is an opening statement from the chairman. And he welcomes the nominee and his family, etc. I mean, it's about as non-political as you can get. But Senator Grassley wasn't even allowed to do that yesterday. The voice, the female voice you're going to hear interrupting him. These are the opening seconds, the opening moments of this hearing. The person you're going to hear is Democrat Senator from California, Kamala Harris, who, by the way, would like to be the next president of the United States. Keep that in your mind as you're listening to this opening yesterday of the hearing. Cut number one.
Good morning. I welcome everyone to this confirmation hearing on the nomination of
Mr. Chairman.
Brett Kavanaugh.
Mr. Chairman.
To serve as Associate Justice.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to be recognized for a question before we proceed.
Regular order, Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to be recognized to ask a question before we proceed. The committee received just last night, less than 15 hours ago, 42,000 pages of documents that we have not had an opportunity to review or read or analyze.
You're out of order. I'll proceed.
We cannot possibly move forward, Mr. Chairman,
I
with this
extend
hearing.
a very warm welcome
We have not
to
been
Judge
given
Kavanaugh,
an opportunity to have a meaningful
his wife.
hearing.
And so it went yesterday. Added to all of that, not just the Democrats continuing to disrupt the proceedings, but also protesters who were in the audience. Now, if you show up on time, you can get a seat for these hearings. So there was protester after protester. In fact, at the end of the day, 70 people were arrested by security people in that hearing. I was telling somebody this morning, it reminded me of these videos you see every now and then from, I don't know, Singapore Parliament or something like that, where it breaks out into fisticuffs, and we all laugh at it. But this was the United States of America yesterday, and we now know that this was orchestrated. This wasn't just something that Kamala Harris or Senator Dick Durbin or others, Senator Booker, Democrat senator, who also wants to be president of the United States, by the way. We found out, and it was confirmed yesterday, that they had a meeting on Sunday night to orchestrate this protest, these demonstrations, these interruptions. Everything that they can do to try to upset the apple cart. And they know what they're doing because the mainstream media is on their side anyway. Mm-hmm. So the mainstream media focuses on all of the disruptions, not what the nominee has to say about things. And by the way, it continued today to a certain extent, but not as bad as yesterday. But here's one of the disturbing things. We heard this first on Sandy Rios this morning. Dr. Tom Schlueter from Texas, who happened, I guess he was on Capitol Hill yesterday. He wanted to be listening to the proceedings. But he was standing outside, and he is making the allegation, with his testimony being a certain degree of proof, that these protesters were being paid by somebody to go in there and disrupt these proceedings. It's cut number 2.
There were people that had come along and had a bag of money, and the people would hand them a piece of paper, and then they would give them money. So we knew that money was being exchanged for some of the people to be here just to protest. There was no depth to what their understanding was or anything. They were just here to be a protester. And they were actually told, we heard them say this and instruct them, when you go in, we want you to yell, to scream, and even to possibly get arrested.
Can you imagine for a moment if this was the other party doing this, what the reaction would be, what the mainstream media stories would be? And just keep in mind, conservatives did not like the fact that Barack Obama became president of the United States. Right. And when he was president of the United States, he had the opportunity to nominate at least 2 people to the Supreme Court, Kagan and Sotomayor. We did not have this kind of thing happening at those hearings. There were people and Republican senators who didn't like some of the things that Sotomayor and Kagan, how they had ruled. And I think it was a Kagan who was a professor at Harvard's law school. I get the two confused sometimes. But we didn't have this kind of chaos. They asked tough questions of these 2 nominees from President Barack Obama. But there was a certain degree of respect for the proceedings. That has gone out the window. Completely. It has gone out the window. And it was interesting, Republican Senator Lindsey Graham is part of the Senate Judiciary Committee. And he got a chance, despite the protests, to ask the nominee, Brett Kavanaugh, some questions. One of them being, did the nominee talk, and this was from today's hearings, did the nominee talk to his kids about this last night?
You live in unusual times, as I do. You should get more than 90 votes, but you won't. And I am sorry it has gotten to where it has. It's got nothing to do about you. If you don't mind, and you don't have to, what did you tell your children yesterday about the hearing?
They did as they, I'll tell them what they told me. I think they gave me a big hug and said, "Good job, Daddy." And Margaret, before she went to bed, made a special trip down and said, "Give me a special hug."
So there's another demonstration of the difference, folks. You know, Lindsey Graham asked a very practical question: what did your kids have to say? I want to talk more about this when we come back after the break. You're listening to Focal Point. Fred Jackson sitting in for Brian Fisher today. Back after the break.
Here's Dr. Carl Trueman from the American Family Studios documentary, The God Who Speaks.
One of the striking things about the Reformation is how corporate their understanding of the Christian life is. Now, there are certain cultural or sociological factors that play into that. But the Reformers' emphasis on the corporate goes beyond the mere incidentals of the historical context in which they live. They also had a powerfully theological understanding of how Christians meet God. And they meet God primarily in the preaching of His Word. You go to church in order to gather with the saints and to hear God's Word proclaimed. And when God's Word is proclaimed to a crowd, it is a powerful and special spiritual experience.
Visit thegodwhospeaks.org.
For even when we were with you, we would give you this command. If anyone is not willing to work, let him not eat. My name is Abraham Hamilton III, and this is the Hamilton Minute. October 11th, 1798, John Adams, the second president of the United States, addressed the Massachusetts militia and said, "Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other." He rightly highlighted the reality that this great American experiment in self-government and liberty would only work where the popular societal ethos is derived from the character produced by the Holy Spirit's indwelling. The recent popularity of socialism is directly related to America moving further away from God.
Listen each weekday from 5 to 6 p.m. Central for the Hamilton Corner, or visit the podcast page at afr.net for more from Abraham Hamilton III, public policy analyst for the American Family Association.
This is Focal Point with Brian Fisher on American Family Radio.
And welcome back to this Wednesday edition of Focal Point. Fred Jackson sitting in for Brian Fisher today. I'm just back from a little vacation up in Nova Scotia. That's where my family is from. A little cooler up there.
I was going to say it'd probably be a nice little escape.
Yeah, it was. Down in the 50s at night and 70s during the day. It was quite nice. And talking with Tim Wildman this morning, and had the obligatory feed of lobster. Oh, yeah. And this is very fresh lobster.
Yeah.
Right out of the cold waters there. So we always kind of enjoy that. But it was a great time. It really is a nice time of the year to go up there, especially if you're living in the South where it's still fairly warm.
What kind of temperatures up there?
Well, this time of the year, like I say, about 50s at night, 70s during the daytime. Okay. Now, they've had, it's funny to hear them complain, they've had a hot summer. 80s.
80s, oh my.
But to their defense, most places up there don't have air conditioning. Okay. So 80s is pretty warm for them.
It's getting toasty at that.
It's getting toasty, but they're welcoming also that cooler weather, and it will come. Speaking of the weather, what Hurricane Gordon, now Tropical Storm Gordon, if you're living along the Gulf Coast of Mississippi, Alabama, you're feeling some of the effects of that today. In fact, where we live in northern Mississippi, we're getting some of the outer bands, but praise the Lord. I was listening to Governor Phil Bryant of Mississippi this morning, and it could have been a lot worse. The storm itself weakened as it came ashore, so we are thankful for that. Our prayers go for one family who lost a little boy. I believe this was along the Alabama coastline, but it could have been a lot worse. For the most part, it's a rain event now. And in fact, much of the state of Alabama and Mississippi can use some of that rain. But I tell you what, it was nice to get to the cooler temps, and we will wait for the cooler temps here as well. We've been talking about the nomination hearing, the Senate Judiciary Committee. The nomination hearing continued today, confirmation hearing for President Trump's nominee to the Supreme Court, Brett Kavanaugh. It was a circus yesterday. I want to make sure we put this in context. And I think the Democratic Party has a problem. They really do. There is a divide even within that party. And we want to make sure not all Democrats would agree with the behavior of many of their colleagues yesterday. They would say it's disgusting also. But there's a battle going on even within the Democratic Party as to where they're headed. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in just a second. But one of the senators yesterday, Nebraska Senator Ben Sasse, I think gave a pretty good summary of where we are right now. And it's not a good place in this country with the political and I would say spiritual divide. So let's have a listen to what he had to say. Cut 4.
The question before us today is not what does Brett Kavanaugh think 11 years ago on some policy matter. The question before us is whether or not he has the temperament and the character to take his policy views and his political preferences and put them in a box marked irrelevant and set it aside every morning when he puts on the black robe. The question is, does he have the character and temperament to do that? If you don't think he does, vote no. But if you think he does, stop the charades. Because at the end of the day, I think all of us know that Brett Kavanaugh understands his job isn't to rewrite laws as he wishes they were. He understands that he's not being interviewed to be a super legislator. He understands that his job isn't to seek popularity. His job is to be fair and dispassionate. It is not to exercise empathy. It is to follow written laws. Contrary to the onion-like smears that we hear outside, Judge Kavanaugh doesn't hate women and children. Judge Kavanaugh doesn't lust after dirty water and stinky air. No, looking at his record, it seems to me that what he actually dislikes are legislators that are too lazy and too risk-averse to do our actual jobs.
So I thought that was a really good kind of summation of where things are. Of course, the nominee was asked about his stand on Roe v. Wade, and to summarize, said it was settled law. And, you know, we knew that was going to come. And there are people on both sides of the political spectrum that are somewhat skeptical of where he may take things. But he said, you know, there's precedent law out there, and it's up to the legislators, the lawmakers of this country, to change laws. That is not his job. In that is refreshing. Because we have activist judges today who don't follow that at all, which has created havoc in this country. All right, so we're going to continue to watch these hearings as they go. There was some talk earlier today that there might be an early kind of ending of the hearings today, which would push things into next week. But I do believe, the speculation is at least, that he will get confirmed to the Supreme Court. But the Democratic Party seems bent on making sure that it is not an easy ride for this nominee.
When do you expect that we may see a vote on this?
Well, I think the hearings may be pushed into next week. It's Wednesday now. We may see a couple more days next week. Okay. But I do believe that you will likely see something within the next 10 days. All right. We'll have to wait and see. The votes seem to be there on the Republican side, and you may still see 2 to 3 Democrats who are up for re-election in November also voting. But for now, the Democrats have, I'll just put it this way, are misbehaving in a way that does not demonstrate what we have seen in the past. And as I say, I think it's all part of the spiritual warfare that's going on in this country. Also, some more controversy on Capitol Hill today. And the Facebook and Twitter executives were in another hearing. And this is about what they can do, what they should be doing to stop any kind of interference in our elections. As we know, there were operatives that tried to use Facebook in the 2016 election. No one was arguing that. But there was something rather interesting that happened outside of that hearing today. InfoWars' Alex Jones, and we want to say once again, we certainly don't agree with everything that Alex Jones stands for. But he has been, we'll put it this way, the victim of the shutting down of some of his social media avenues. And he was on Capitol Hill today to, I guess, get a platform for his concerns about what social media and the social media giants could do to conservative speakers. And so let's hear from Alex Jones. This is cut number 2.
I am here because there is a concerted effort by the Democratic Party and multinational corporations and big tech to silence conservative and nationalist and populist voices ahead of this critical midterm election. And the big tech companies and the head of Apple admit that they met with Senator Warner, who's running this whole thing, to begin shutting down conservatives, or the Democrats threatened to federalize big tech if they did not basically roll over to them. So the Republicans left a vacuum there by not coming in with regulations to say you cannot violate people's free speech. So I want regulations like the First Amendment to be enforced to say you're not going to violate people's free speech. You're not going to be able to shut people down like this. And I'm also here to be able to face my accusers. This is the 11th hearing they've had where they make up all these incredible lies about me and others to sell the end of the First Amendment. It's happening to everybody now who's a libertarian or conservative. The dominoes are falling. The First Amendment's being destroyed. But I think the corporate dying dinosaur media has bit off more than it can chew. And what you've done is only going to make people be that much stronger and fight for free speech that much more. But I'll say this, shame on the mainstream corporate media, shame on the mainstream corporate media for not defending the First Amendment, but instead attack dogging, calling for federal regulators to shut down independent free press, working with big tech. These big monopolies need to be broken up. And these are digital commons, they've said in their own words, and under federal law, and they shouldn't be in there controlling what individuals are saying in those private discussions and in those discussions online if it's not criminal what's being said and what's being done.
All right, there you have it. That's Alex Jones, InfoWars Alex Jones, on Capitol Hill today, making his point, and there's videos of this up there. But there was another interesting incident. I'm not sure if it came after this, but it occurred outside the hearing room. And this was the Senate Intelligence Committee hearing with these leaders of these social media. And a member of that committee is Marco Rubio, Republican senator from Florida. And this was kind of interesting. Alex Jones interrupts him. He is being interviewed by reporters outside in the hallway. And it becomes very, very clear that Senator Marco Rubio doesn't have a clue of who Alex Jones is. So we're going to listen to a little bit of the exchange. So Marco Rubio being interviewed by reporters, Alex Jones is interrupting that interchange.
Look, it's happening here. It's happening here, but you say I don't exist. Look at this guy. He's saying that I don't exist.
You're not familiar
I just don't know who you are,
man.
I don't read your website. Sure. And they demonize me in these very hearings.
That's Marco Rubio saying, I don't know who you are.
Infowars.com, you know what it is. Oh, well.
Does Google, does Facebook,
that's why you didn't get elected.
Need to be regulated like do they need to be regulated?
Marco Rubio and the snake. Little frat boy here.
All right, man.
Yeah.
Well, who are you, man?
Yeah,
all right. So,
you
you get the flavor. Marco Rubio being interviewed by reporters, he does not have a clue who Alex Jones is. Alex Jones is trying to make the point. I think the fact that Marco Rubio doesn't know who he is, that the Senate Intelligence Committee ought to be spending some time in this hearing talking about the threat to free speech in this country. They're dealing with the Russias, the Chinas, possibly using Facebook and Twitter to interfere with our elections. What Alex Jones is saying, and what many conservatives agree with Alex Jones on this point, is that there is a real concern that possibly that these social media types, which tend to be run by very liberal people, are going to work to shut out and have, to a certain extent, some conservatives from social media.
That is not a joke. We've noticed it here at American Family Radio that even though we are getting continual additions and likes and people interacting on threads, the reach has gone down 40% or more consistently now for at least the last 3 or 4 months. I mean, it is painfully obvious that they are doing something.
Well, and Alex Jones is certainly right. You have a monopoly right now. You've got 2 or 3 of the big dogs out there, the Facebooks, the Twitters, and a few more like that. If they decide that, like conservative voices represent hate speech, they can shut you down.
Yes.
And that's where we are. And Alex Jones is saying to this committee, to Marco Rubio and others, hey, listen, this is of concern to us. If you're concerned about free speech rights in this country, you better listen to us. Listening to Focal Point, Fred Jackson sitting in for Brian. We're back with a very special guest today. Very special guest, a voice that you hear frequently here in American Family Radio. Dr. Robert Jeffress will be in to talk about his brand new book when we return here on Focal Point.
This is Dr. Richard Land, president of Southern Evangelical Seminary. Welcome to Bringing Every Thought Captive. We have just celebrated Labor Day, the holiday that supposedly signifies the end of summer and the beginning of fall activities and the fall semester of school, etc. Labor Day celebrates the working men and women of America. But what does the Bible say about work? The Bible tells us that God never intended for men and women to be idle or indolent. Even before the fall, God placed Adam in the Garden of Eden, a paradise, with instructions to till it and to keep it. To till it means to cause it to bring forth its fruit and to develop it. And to keep it means to guard and protect it as wise stewards of God's creation. Alas, after the fall, the creation was cursed, and man was to experience work as far more arduous and laborious in a fallen world. By the sweat of thy brow shalt thou eat bread, Genesis 3:19. Still, Luke tells us that the laborer is worthy of his hire. Honest labor is to be admired and can be an act of worship. Luther said that if a carpenter built a table or a chair to the best of his God-given ability, then the carpenter could present that work as an act of worship. God never intended for us to be idle. Now we may retire from a profession or from a job for many reasons. Maybe new opportunities, maybe declining physical strength, etc. That does not mean we are to sit around and do nothing. God intends for us to be employed in productive activities. If we are financially independent, then we are free to work for the Lord in volunteering and in helping others, or volunteering for ministry activities. God created us to serve Him even before the fall, and He intends for us to use our God-given skills and the time allotted to each one of us for His glory. This is Richard Land.
This is Focal Point with Brian Fisher
on American Family Radio.
Listen to the audio podcast or download today's program at afr.net. You can also read Brian Fisher's columns at afa.net.
afa.net.
And welcome back to Focal Point on this Wednesday. Fred Jackson sitting in for vacationing Brian Fisher. Brian will be back in the chair next Monday. We hope he's having a great time wherever he is, probably visiting family. On the West Coast. Yeah, Brian Fisher on the West Coast, California. That could be potentially fun out there for Brian. It's, you know, one of the great blessings here in American Family Radio is the great preaching programs that we have along with talk radio. And one of those great programs that you hear Monday through Friday at 6:05 here in American Family Radio is Pathway to Victory. And if you're a regular listener to that, you know it's hosted by Dr. Robert Jeffress, who is the pastor of First Baptist Church in Dallas. Small church there in the center of town.
That's right.
He's joining us in studio right now, and he has a brand new book out called Choosing the Extraordinary Life. Dr. Jeffress, great to have you with us today.
Thanks, Fred. Thanks for having me.
You've been here at American Family Radio today talking about this. I was intrigued by the choice of your title, Choosing the Extraordinary Life. Now, you know, many times as Christians we say, you know, God has a plan for our lives. But in His sovereignty, He still gives us a choice as to how we interact with His plan.
You know, our lives are really the sum of the choices that we make in life, in every area of life. And I've talked about choosing the extraordinary life. The subtitle is God's 7 Secrets for Success and Significance. Those secrets are really choices that we make. And the fact is, most people aren't living an extraordinary life. I tell the story about the Chicago sewer worker who was asked, why do you do what you do? And he said, well, I dig the ditch to earn the money, to buy the bread, to get the strength, to dig the ditch. And, you know, unfortunately, that's how many Christians live. You know, They get up, go to work, come home, have supper, watch a little TV, go to bed, and then repeat the cycle. God has more in store for us than that. And I use the story of Elijah in the Old Testament as the basis for these 7 secrets, 7 choices Elijah made. And people say, why'd you choose somebody who lived thousands of years ago? Why is Elijah relevant? Well, the Bible says he wasn't a spiritual super person. He was an ordinary ordinary person with like passions as we are. That means he got tired, he got discouraged, he got tempted, he disobeyed occasionally, and yet God used him in his generation in an extraordinary way. And I take the 7 choices he made and show how we can all make those choices and live an extraordinary life.
I got a feeling we have a lot of people who are listening right now, and they're saying, you know, I'm kind of like that worker up in Chicago. You know, I get up in the morning and I go to work and I get a paycheck and I do it all over again when Monday comes around again. So tell us about some of the things that can make a difference, that give our life meanings as born-again believers.
Well, I start with, and secret number 1 is to discover your unique purpose in life. You know, somebody said the 2 greatest days of your life are when you were born and the day you discover why you were born. And we all know God saved us to glorify himself, to point people to him. That's a general purpose. But God has a specific purpose for our lives to achieve God's purpose. I use the word story. God is telling a story in the universe, but he's also telling a story in our lives to tell his story. And I use that word story as an acrostic, S-T-O-R-Y, for the 5 principles for discovering your unique purpose in living. And many people have said that's worth the price of the book, just that acrostic and how it can help me. A lot of our listeners right now may have teenagers at home or perhaps young adults, and they're just now struggling to find their way and their purpose. It's important to discover that purpose. It's a beacon that gives us direction in life. I talk about determining to influence your culture. People who are going to make an extraordinary difference realize they can't stay in their holy huddles as Christians. They need to make an impact on the generation. I talk about unleashing the secret of the power of prayer. That's key to an extraordinary life. You know, somebody said, if you want to see God do big things in your life, pray for big things in your life. My daughter went through 3 miscarriages, and she and her husband decided to pray for triplets. Now, we don't have triplets in our family, no history of that whatsoever, but she was praying for triplets, 1 life to stand for each life that was lost, and God answered that prayer. And in December, she gave birth to triplets, and again, she's writing a book right now. It's called Pray Big Things. Well, that's what I think Elijah did. I mean, he prayed for it not to rain, and it didn't rain. He prayed for it to rain, it did rain. He prayed for the fire to come down. In a simple 64-word prayer, fire came down. And we talk about Elijah's secret of prayer. These are just 3 of the 7 secrets we talk about in my book, Choosing the Extraordinary Life.
You know, you give the example of your daughter and the difficulty that she faced when it comes to children. And there are people listening right now saying, wait a minute, you know, I pray and I read God's word each day, but I'm going through some really rough times right now. Yeah. But that can be part of God's plan for your life, too.
Well, it can. In fact, that's one of the secrets we talk about is extraordinary people learn how to handle bad days or what can be bad seasons of life. You know, we all go through them. Elijah went through them right after the great victory on Mount Carmel. He fell into depression. He went and isolated himself, and he had to learn how to handle that bad season of life. And I use his life as an example of how to do that. You know, you hit upon another secret there, too, I talk about is waiting on God's timing. You know, sometimes we just want to move from event to event, success to success, failure to success. And God says, no, wait. There's a time out. Elijah appeared on the scene. King Ahab made his dramatic pronouncement. Then God said, go hide yourself. For 6 months, he was alone by the brook Kerith. For several years with the widow at Zarephath. I'm sure Elijah thought God had forgotten all about him. But instead, God was doing some works in Elijah's life, teaching him some invaluable truths. We may be talking right now to a mom at home stuck with several toddlers and wondering, has God forgotten me? Or maybe you're in a monotonous job and think you've been overlooked. Remember this, waiting time doesn't have to be wasted time. And we talk about that in the chapter on waiting on God's timing.
Now, I think a lot of people in our audience are familiar with you beyond your program here at American Family Radio. They see you on Fox News, and you're an advisor to President Trump. Was that part of your plan of your life back 3 or 4 years ago?
Part of it was and part of it wasn't. Nobody could have foreseen Donald J. Trump except God. I mean, he's a really a phenomenon of history, really. But, you know, when I go back to discovering my purpose, I remember about 40 years ago sitting down and knowing that I was going to be a pastor, but I wrote down, you know, what is the unique purpose for which I was created? And, you know, it was to be an effective communicator of God's Word. And that's been my inward passion, my purpose. And everything I do, everything I say yes to or I say no to is related to that purpose statement. So, yes, I knew I was going to have a radio ministry at some point. I knew I was going to have a television ministry. God put that passion in my heart. And by the way, to our listeners, one of the great ways to know God's unique purpose for you is to ask yourself, what is your passion? The O in story, that acrostic, is obey your passion. So many people get mixed up about this. They think that God's will for my life must be the most distasteful, most unpleasurable thing I could possibly do. No, when you're walking with the Lord, God makes His desires your desires. Psalm 37:4, delight yourself in the Lord, and He will give you the desires of your heart.
We're talking with Dr. Robert Jeffress. He is pastor of First Baptist Dallas, but also the author of a brand new book, just came out yesterday.
Came out yesterday, Choosing the Extraordinary Life, and it's available at all bookstores, secular and sacred, online like Amazon, and I think it's available at AFA
Store.
Yeah, AFA Store.
.net. Yeah, we can get it there. I do want to ask you, because I know people would have this question. If they could call in right now, they would ask, what's it like to sit down with President Donald Trump and to have a conversation? A lot of people know him from TV.
Yeah.
And from the, I would call it the left-wing bias of the mainstream media. What's your experience?
Well, I was with him last Monday in the Oval Office, got to spend some time with him, and he is one of the most interesting, fascinating people to talk to. First of all, in a lot of ways, he's very different than the on-camera or on-stage persona. You hear all of this about the Woodward book. Let me just make this comment about all of that. You can't become a billionaire and president of the United States by being an out-of-control, maniacal idiot, you know, like Woodward's book suggests. He's very calm, very thoughtful when you talk to him. He asks great questions. Again, you don't get to where he is without being highly intelligent. But he's very insightful. It is true. He has a short attention span. A lot of intelligent people have short attention spans. But, you know, I would say, again, I think the Kavanaugh hearings this week are a great reminder of why we voted for President Trump. Evangelicals did, by the largest margin in history. You know, the 2016 exit polls from that election showed the primary reason they voted for Trump, we voted for Trump, was his commitment to a conservative judiciary. Well, this week we're seeing that played out and fulfilled once again. And, you know, I kind of liken this. When I read that Woodward book, I think about, you know, the fact that sausage is delicious, but the process of making sausage is disgusting. And a lot of times, if people look at the inner workings of the White House, this White House or any White House, it can be disturbing and you don't like and there's dysfunction, but we need to focus on the end result, the product. And the fact is, Donald Trump has become the most pro-life, pro-religious liberty, pro-conservative judiciary president in history.
What impact do you think that you and Vice President Pence and others have had who are evangelical Christians? What do you believe the impact has been on President Trump?
Well, I'll leave that to President Trump to answer, but I think, you know, I tell people all the time since the beginning about President Trump, look, he may not be exactly like us, but at least he likes us and doesn't hate us like the last president did. And I think he's been a good, great president, and I think the most consequential president since Abraham Lincoln.
Amen. Dr. Robert Jeffress, pastor of First Baptist Dallas, host Pathway to Victory, and the author of a brand new book, Choosing the Extraordinary Life. You can get it at major bookstores, you can get it online, including afastore.net. Dr. Jeffress, thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having me, Fred.
All right, God bless. All right, you're listening to Focal Point, much more ahead on today's program. Fred Jackson sitting in for Brian. A busy day. Don't go away. We'll be right back.
Who is God?
What's he like?
How can we know? Your answer to these questions will impact your worship, discipleship, apologetics, and evangelism. Learn from Ravi Zacharias, Josh McDowell, Chip Ingram, and more than 60 other speakers at Southern Evangelical Seminary's 25th Annual National Conference on Christian Apologetics. It's October 12th and 13th in Charlotte, North Carolina. Homeschool, skeptic, and group discounts are available. Pre-registration ends October 9th at ses.edu.
I'm Ed Vitagliano. The direction of our country was changed by the presidential election of 2016, due in part to Christian voters. The 2018 midterm elections may confirm that direction or change it again. By voting based on values, Christians bring a godly influence to government. Voter registration deadlines vary by state. Make sure you are registered, and then, on Election Day, make sure to vote. Be an informed voter. Visit afaaction.net to get the AFA Action Voter Guide.
This is Life Issues with Brad Mattis, president of Life Issues Institute.
Countless pro-life individuals and organizations have experienced the wrath of Facebook via censorship. In some cases, they were outrageously declared to be unsafe by the social media giant. During a House Judiciary Committee hearing dealing with the censorship of social media sites, Congressman Matt Gaetz asked why a Facebook page is outright advocating the assassination of Republican congressmen and still up and running. It in part reads, shooting them should happen every week. Facebook had responded to their previous inquiry saying, it doesn't go against one of our specific community standards. Now the congressman wanted answers, but he still didn't get them. Facebook's official said, we can follow up with it. This may get ugly. I'll keep you posted.
Like us on Facebook at Life Issues and stay informed, more informed than you've ever been.
American Family Radio. You're listening to Focal Point with Brian Fisher.
And this is the Wednesday edition of Focal Point. Fred Jackson sitting in for Brian today. Well, there is some other news going on today of great interest beyond what's happening in Washington, D.C. There was what's called a Massachusetts primary stunner last night. Now, you're familiar, I know, with in the Democratic Party, there is a woman, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and she shocked the Democratic Party and really the political world when there was a Democrat primary in New York back a few weeks ago, and she beat out an incumbent there, Democrat. Now, she is about as far left as you can get in this country at the moment. She even makes Bernie Sanders sometimes look conservative. Mm-hmm. Well, if the Democrats, it's a problem for them because she's so far left. They are concerned they're going to scare away voters with what, she wants free tuition for everybody, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, a living wage, all of those kinds of things. So they're trying to figure out how to deal with that because that's the kind of thing when people hear her talk, and I'm talking about Ocasio-Cortez here, but a lot of people thought, okay, that's just a one case. That's not going to happen again. Well, it did last night. A woman by the name of Ayanna Pressley, who has been a city councilor in Boston now for several years, she beat out a 10-term Democrat incumbent congressman there in the Boston area. And we're talking about an area of Massachusetts that Democratic icons like Tip O'Neill, and John F. Kennedy held back in years gone by. Now she, and just to show you that she is in the same camp as Bernie Sanders and others, she was celebrated, her victory was celebrated last night in that case. So there you have it. Once again, these are people who want to change the party. In fact, Pressley, in her acceptance speech last night, said this is a fight for the soul of our party and the future of our democracy. So you have this divide in the Democratic Party, but also it's a reflection of where we are, I think, in the country right now, as far as what is the role of government. is that the role of government is to take care of everybody. It is a Bernie Sanders vision. And Bernie Sanders got a lot of Democrat support, younger voters for the most part, which is a bit unusual given Bernie Sanders' age, that he got the support of so many 20 and 30-year-olds. But he does reflect a certain political philosophy and ideology that many people in that age bracket adhere to. So now you have this victory last night. Again, this woman, Presley, unseating a 10-term Democrat incumbent congressman. She is going to go to Washington because there's no Republican that is going to challenge her in that district. So it's going to be very interesting to see. As you know, we were talking about earlier in the program, Kamala Harris, as the Democrat senator from California, Cory Booker, a Democrat senator from Massachusetts, I believe it is. They want to be president. They want the nomination in 2020 of the Democratic Party. So it is going to be interesting to see how the Democratic Party irons all of this out. More so, I think, for 2020, but to a certain extent for this election that's coming up. It's very interesting to listen to some people like Republican Congressman Jim Jordan. And they are cotton on to this, and they believe that this is an issue that the Republican Party should highlight over the next couple of months leading up to November's election. Highlight the far leftness of this element in the Democratic Party as a choice between what you see there in the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. Don't try to run from it, he is saying to the Republican Party, but embrace the idea of that difference and then go tell voters what that difference is. So let's have a listen to cut number 6.
This just shows where they're at. I mean, the Democrats' plan is that they want to raise your taxes, they want to abolish ICE, they want to socialize medicine, and they want to impeach the president. So our contrast is, let's do what we said, there's what they want to do. That's how this election should play out. I think Speaker Gingrich has said it right. We should nationalize this election, show the contrast, show the distinction between their hard left agenda and what we're doing for the American people and how we're completing what we were elected to do. That should be how we frame this thing up over the next 62 days.
So there you have it, some advice from Congressman Jim Jordan of Ohio, Republican Congressman Jim Jordan of Ohio, for the party right now. And you know, we talk about the fight for the soul of the Democratic Party. There's a bit of that going on in the Republican Party as well. And this has to do really with what brought President Donald Trump into office, is the divide in the Republican Party. Remember, he said he was going to Washington to clean up the swamp. And that's still a problem within the Republican Party as well. So this is a very interesting time in American politics. The dynamics that we are seeing at the federal level, I think is really going to determine the direction of the country and where we're going to go. I've often said that as these millennials, and I know not all millennials think this way. Let me put that right out there. Okay. But as a whole, if you look at the polls, the majority of millennials have been, I think, the victims of or acceptance of propaganda from the left that's been going on for years and years now, that the government indeed is there to take care of you and take care of everybody else. And that's all part of the political dynamics that's going on in this country right now. But I do believe as these people get older and they get jobs and they start to see how much money this costs, i.e. how much taxes they have to pay, you see a change of heart many times in these individuals when certain realities hit them. Because all of these programs that these lefties talk about cost a whole lot of money. And they also understand that, you know, the claim from the Bernie Sanders of this world is that, well, we just want that top 10% to pay a little bit more. Well, no, that's not going to be the answer to jobs for everybody, minimum wages of $15 for everybody, free health care for everybody, free tuition for everybody.
That free stuff gets pretty expensive.
That free stuff gets really expensive. So anyway, that's the result we saw in Massachusetts last night. As I say, this is an area of Massachusetts that people like Tip O'Neill and John F. Kennedy, they were all part of that. I think if they were around today, they'd be shocked at what was happening even within their own party. And so we'll just have to wait and see. All right, there's a new book out there by Bob Woodward.
Yeah.
You may remember him. He's getting on in years now. I'm not sure if he's still associated with the Washington Post, but he and Bernstein, of course, are held in a certain degree of esteem in the journalistic community for breaking the Watergate story back in the Richard Nixon years. Well, Woodward hasn't gone away. He's got a brand new book out called Fear. Trump in the White House is what it's called. Now, it's getting a whole lot of play today. In fact, we were just watching President Trump responding to it. It is extremely, extremely critical of President Trump, and it alleges accounts of people who have worked for the president who say things like he's an idiot, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, many of these people, including Chief of Staff Kelly, General Mattis, and others, have denied ever saying what Bob Woodward quotes them as saying about the president. And Sarah Huckabee Sanders, who is the face of the president that you see each day in the media briefing, she was asked about the book this morning, the Woodward book, and this is what she had to say. Cut 5.
Look, there's no doubt the president is his own best advocate. He has an incredible story to tell, and that's why he does that every single day. That's why he gives speeches, roundtables, and talks about not only the successes that we've had, but the other things that we're going to do over the next 6 years that he's in office. But I think more important than that we've seen are the things that have come out after this book from General Mattis, General Kelly, pushing back on these fictitious claims that this book seems to be filled with that we've seen so far.
So there you have it. That's Sarah Huckabee Sanders. President Trump responding this morning, insisting that he's the exact opposite of Bob Woodward's portrayal of him in that new book. And, you're going to see, like I say, the mainstream media is just embracing this. They think Bob Woodward is a hero once again and trying to go back and regain his glory days from the Watergate story. And I don't think it's going to happen. Honestly, I think it has the reverse effect. The mainstream media has been hounding Donald Trump since the day he became president, and to a certain extent even before, during the election campaign. And I think the American people are just tired of this. And when I say that in general terms, the American people have certain concerns about the president, but they see a president being hounded no matter what he does, no matter what he says, is all bad. And the American people simply aren't buying that anymore. So I don't think the Bob Woodward book is going to have much of an impact, certainly on the election coming up. President Trump is going to continue to be President Trump and steam forward. That's just the kind of individual he is. All right, that's it for us today here on Focal Point. Fred sitting in for Brian Fisher. Much more great programming ahead here on American Family Radio. Lord willing, we'll see you again tomorrow right here on Focal Point.
The views and opinions expressed in this broadcast may not necessarily reflect those of the American Family Association or American Family Radio. Faith